All right, good afternoon. How many of you are attending Seattle Startup Week for your first time? Wow, that's awesome. Nice. How many of you currently work at a startup? And how many of you are here because you're aspiring to work at a startup or start your own? And how many are here because you are at a big company and you're just sort of trying to learn more about how startups work? Not that many. All right, so we got a lot of passion around startups. A lot of people curious about how to get into that. And we've got some fantastic panelists here to talk about, in particular, disruption in the mobile industry, what is changing as a result of having supercomputers in our pocket on a regular basis, and how, in very practical terms, 3 different companies are approaching the mobile market and changing consumer expectations. So I'm Roby Ganguly, co-founder and CEO of a local startup called Apptentive. We help mobile companies communicate with their customers inside their apps and really develop loyalty and understanding. And I would love for each of you to introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about what you do, and then talk about what disruptive in your industry looks like.
Sure. Hi, my name is Lisa Hillman. I'm the manager for digital adoption for T-Mobile. What that means is I spend every day trying to answer the question of how do we get our customers to use digital, particularly the T-Mobile app. I think for us in our industry, when we think about disruption, right, T-Mobile is always known as sort of the Un-carrier who've been trying to change the wireless industry overall since John Ledger joined about 4 years ago. And so for us, it's about asking the question of how do we do things differently for our customers, and how do we look at it from their perspective. So I think we've been doing a fairly good job of that within the wireless industry itself. And now it's a matter of how do we actually do that for digital? How do we think differently about what our customers want in the future?
And my name is Josh Hugg. I'm the co-founder and COO of a company in town called Remitly. And what we're doing is we're taking a very old practice, which is sending money across borders, for especially focused on immigrants that immigrate to another country, and taking that and disrupting it by moving it from largely a cash-based activity where you would go to an agent and you would provide cash to that agent, and then they would then release the money in a foreign country, to a digital-based product where we have a mobile app and a mobile experience where customers can send money to their loved ones and instantly overseas, over thousands and thousands of miles, without having to have the inconvenience and the cost associated with going to physical agents.
My name is Holly Hauser. I am the Seattle market manager for ReachNow. We are BMW car sharing, so we have 520 car sharing vehicles all throughout Seattle, as well as cars in Portland, and we just announced in Brooklyn as well. So we are very much an app-based car sharing service. We are obviously disrupting the mobility industry and the automobile industry by basically allowing people to get around via vehicles without having to own or lease their own vehicle, basically providing a membership-based program by which you can use a vehicle. Disruption comes at a lot of different levels for us, though. That's sort of the most basic one, but also in terms of disrupting our parent company, BMW, by being sort of this little startup in Seattle away from the big parent in Munich, is something that has been really interesting to sort of see, and to sort of teach BMW about how startups run and how we need to run and how we need to be agile and flexible and move quickly on things. And then with a number of product launches that we announced yesterday, we are starting to disrupt even the shared mobility industry by offering a number of different shared mobility options, including ride sharing, peer-to-peer car sharing, reserve, long-term reserve, all within a single integrated app, which has not been done before. So disruption on a variety of levels.
Awesome. So good introduction. I want to jump into disruption a little bit more deeply, right? Because we probably hear the term disruption in the technology industry 37 times a day, but what does that mean? What does it really look like? So I'm curious, T-Mobile's been around a long time. It's an industry that's highly regulated, maybe not very flexible, right? You have axes that you can pursue that are disruptive. How do you internally talk about define disruption and then think about executing against it?
Yeah, so I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, the concept of disruptive innovation has been around since the mid '90s. You talk about Clayton Christensen and disruptive innovation, but I think for us, and if you apply that sort of construct to T-Mobile, it really started to come into play when John Ledger came in about 4 years ago, and he sort of threw all of the rules out the window and just said, we're going to do this differently. Forget about contracts. He would probably use a much more extreme word. In that case, he tends to swear a lot. Throw contracts out the window, throw rate plans out the window, give people, unlimited data, unlimited video streaming. Now we've sort of done all of that, right? We've done all of the things. We've removed the traditional pain points for customers. So it's sort of what's next for us. And I think one of the things that we have historically not done well is do anything in digital, do anything in the mobile space, which is ironic since we're a mobile provider and we provide you your internet, and yet our digital presence is pretty poor. So when we think about it internally and disrupting how we do that, it's how do we start changing our culture internally to understand how a customer thinks and operates in that digital form. So for us, the way that we've sort of expressed this in the last year is changing how we deal with customer service. So we introduced asynchronous messaging within the app so you can communicate with our customer service agents through your phone the same way that you would communicate with your friends via text. And it's a concept that is sort of a no-duh moment. Like, why wouldn't we have done this? I mean, we had SMS in 1992, created by a mobile carrier. But it's now that we're finally sort of incorporating it into our own DNA and recognizing that we need to make that change.
So it's a no-duh moment, right? Like, I think that must mean that internally people were championing this for years before you got it to happen. Is that correct?
Yes and no. I think we probably had some advocates, but it's something that required some champions. And in order for that disruption to work, it wasn't just the digital teams, right? It's something that, and I think that's for us, for disruption to happen in our industry, you need people changing not just the mobile experience, but for customer experience end to end to occur, it has to be the customer service agents. It has to be the retail folks in store, right? People want to communicate with humans when they're talking to wireless carriers, and so it brings a lot of people on that journey with us.
So inside of a big company, the process of disruption, something like that, where I think most of us can feel like, oh yeah, of course you should take better care of us and you should talk to us. You're internally trying to get multiple pieces connected in order to act on that. And then I think that there's an interesting corollary with the ReachNow business. And you're saying, hey, we split off this different division. It's in Seattle. But what was required before that in order to get to that conviction that we have to do this? Was it scare and response, or was it proactive and it took a while and then it was accelerated as you saw Uber and Lyft and ride sharing in general go?
I think, BMW is a 100-year-old company that has always been really focused on innovation in one way or another, and this was sort of the next step in innovation for them. And, obviously all of these old car companies are realizing that the industry is changing. People aren't owning cars like they used to. People are using new forms of shared mobility. And, for BMW, they realized that they had to shift their thinking around that as well. And not only offer, the reason the company is called ReachNow and not Drive Now or something like that is because they realized that this wasn't just going to be a single product. It wasn't just going to be car sharing. It was going to be much more than that. And looking forward towards autonomous vehicles as well and how that weaves into everything. They saw this as being a suite of mobility options and not just a singular one. So the idea of doing ride sharing, the peer-to-peer car sharing, the reserve. We also announced corporate fleet fleet solutions, so residential and corporate fleet solutions, where essentially you would have a dedicated fleet of vehicles within a building that's available to residents or tenants of that building. All of those things work together to provide, somebody basically every option that they could possibly need. You could take a car sharing vehicle, go out, have a couple drinks with your friends, not want to drive home, and you could use the same app to hail a ride sharing driver to come and pick you up and take you. So having that all at your fingertips within a single mobile app is really important.
And that last part, all at your fingertips within a single mobile app, that wouldn't have been possible to talk about or think about 8 years ago, right? So that's like a disruptive force that you're taking advantage of. How much is that driving the strategy? The fact that the mobile phone now has put this thing in your hands that you can actually access and light up more customers.
Very much so. It's interesting, though, because from a technical standpoint, it's really easy to put all these different solutions into one app. Where you run into issues is making the user experience clear for the user. You look at something like Uber Eats, which initially got launched as part of the Uber app, but they found that for the customer, it was just way too confusing to navigate what you wanted to do. Wait, am I ordering food? Am I ordering a car? I'm not sure. So we have to spend a lot more energy on the UX UI side of things than the technology side of things, just to create something that makes sense to people that they can use.
All right, so that brings us to the true startup on the panel, Remitly, right, which has brought a solution to a market that's, a century old, more than a century old. As soon as people started immigrating to other countries, remittances became a thing, and then you are able to bring a whole new perspective on the tool sets and the UX and UI for these customers. So what's disruption for you? How are you taking advantage of it? And as a startup, do you face any of these challenges that the larger companies are?
I think that there's definitely some common themes relating to what disruption looks like. And I mean, because you take the example of Remitly, I mean, the reason the Western Union is the leader in the marketplace is because of the telegraph. Like that's how far back it goes relating to how people were sending money, and they've built a business on top of that very traditional technology. In many ways, like if you think about cars, like we have a pattern at which we use for transportation. And then if we think about, like, I think it's what's really interesting is that if you think about the T-Mobile example, like they are taking relatively new, like it's a relatively new phenomenon that we can actually even communicate with wireless phones, and they're disrupting themselves at a rapid pace. But the common theme that I think that has dramatically changed in the last 8 years is the level of connectivity that consumers have. If you look back 15, 20 years ago, people were doing online remittances, but the customers weren't there. There wasn't the opportunity to actually create a critical mass of customers that you could communicate to that could understand your product, because there's both an education element on the design, and we have to design better apps, but you also have to have customers that can use more complex apps. And customers are used to messaging interfaces. Customers are used to all of these new interaction paradigms that they get value on a variety of different places for. And so what we've taken advantage of is that trust that customers have gained in digital technology to do something that's very, very requires an extreme amount of trust, which is I'm going to give you my money, and I'm going to trust that my money is going to get halfway around the world to my loved ones. And if it doesn't get there, then I'm screwed, because this is really, really important for me. That's the reason that I've paid exorbitant fees to go to an online agent and have it or to an offline agent to have it taken care of in the past.
So that's really interesting, because it's like the technology is valuable, but the trust issue in your industry in particular, the trust issue is such a high bar, right? It's like, oh, great, I have this mobile app, sure, but why should I trust it, right? And how do you educate people? How do you try to go down that vector of, trust is a really big deal in our industry. We're trying to disrupt Western Union, which everybody knows, it totally works. How do you build trust? How do you disrupt trust in the form of your competition?
I mean, it sounds really basic, but delivering the money on time is hard, and fulfilling your promises. And so what we've done is put a lot of energy into what we call promises delivered, where we're trying to deliver our promises that we're making to our customers, and in turn, our customers are making promises to their loved ones. And so that's an all-encompassing, though, trust that you need to build. It's not just the interaction that they have within your app, or your advertising. It's also what happens after the transaction. How do you message them when things go wrong? Things go wrong, and taking care of those in a really clean and clear and transparent way is really, really important for building that trust.
So to poke a little bit more, because we have so many startuppers in the audience, your experience along this journey is that you and Matt really identified an opportunity years and years ago. You saw it sort of firsthand. You experienced and traveled and saw the things that could be changing. But then you had to build a company from very small team, small amount of resources to go disrupt this thing that was really disparate. How did you go actually attack this? I know that you had a pretty specific strategy.
So the number one thing that we did is focus. And that's what I would recommend as you think about trying to disrupt something, is find the pain point that you think is the most acute and focus on solving that one pain point. And in our case, we focused on the Philippines, and we focused on which is a very small sliver of the actual market. There's lots of markets that people send money to, but we focused on the Philippines such that we could actually refine the customer experience and create a good customer experience and only market to a subset of our long-term customer base, such that we could actually learn how to build a solution that we could then take out to a broader audience. I think a lot of mistakes that I see startups making is going too broad too early, and then they make a really poor customer experience that's broadly applicable across the entire world, and they're like, how do I fix this? Because it gets combinatorically more complex to fix something once you are spread out and spread too thin.
So that complexity, right? On the flip side, T-Mobile has tremendous amounts of complexity, right? Lots of different companies that have been integrated over the years as a result of purchases, ton of different service providers, technology stacks that are incompatible, customers in different regions that, show up in different ways in different systems. So you have all this complexity already. And now we're talking about focus. How do you focus with that complexity and not get bogged down by people saying, oh, but your requirements are 3 pages long?
I mean, to some extent, I think in order to accomplish any form of disruption within a company of our size, you need some executives who are focused, right? So we had the benefit in the last year of sort of going on this journey of introducing async messaging, of having champions at the executive level who just wanted to get this done, right? And they were able then to give the teams that were working on it the latitude they needed to make good decisions and get things done that way. To be honest, we struggle with that a lot, right? We struggle with focus. We work on too many things at once. But I think to me, it's about having that strategic vision and the customer experience being sort of core to that strategic vision. And then you sort of block out the noise, right? Because if you know who your customer is and what you're shooting for, then it makes it a lot easier for the teams to have something as a sort of guiding light.
So that makes sense. And I'm going to take that and put this on you, Holly. Who's your customer? When you're trying to go after this huge transportation industry and mobility is changing, who's your customer that you're focused on? How did you come to that conclusion? Then how are you taking another step further, actually measuring whether or not that customer is the one that's satisfied?
We're focusing obviously on urban areas first because that's where the mobility needs exist. Seattle was chosen, so some of you may not know, ReachNow is actually headquartered in Seattle. BMW made that choice to headquarter us here and also have Seattle be our pilot city, the first city we launched in, and that was a very, very intentional decision for a variety of different reasons. Obviously, they saw that companies like Car2Go and Uber had been very successful here. So there was obviously the appetite for it. The city of Seattle and SDOT has made a very sort of open regulatory environment that's made it easy for us to come in and get the permits that we need. But even more importantly, and I think I'm seeing this more as, I focus on a lot of the marketing piece of things, there's a huge tech community, obviously. And anytime you're rolling out a new product, having a savvy customer that, understands apps, understands sort of the MVP that you put out there, knows that it's only going to improve over time and has some patience to deal with that, I think has proved to be very, very beneficial for our first market. And it's been interesting. We launched in Portland, and Portland has been a lot slower in terms of adoption rates. And anytime, when I'm marketing, anytime I go to any sort of tech event, that is where we have the most interest. That's when we get the most people signing up, as opposed to a variety of other sort of groups in the city. So, that's proven to be a group that is at least very, very interested in our product. Also is great because they provide a ton of feedback to us, and a ton of really great constructive feedback as well. But that being said, obviously shared mobility is being used by the millennials, a lot of people who are just choosing not to own their own car because they have a lot of other options out there. We're really trying to provide a product by offering a variety of different types of vehicles that can also serve families as well. They seat more people than a car to go. We also, launched this reserve product, which is basically a long-term rental product, counterless rental, so you don't actually have to go pick up a car. The car actually gets delivered to you, so you can actually use these cars for long trips as well. So we're trying to sort of, start with the early adopters and the younger folks who are technologically savvy, and then eventually sort of spread out.
So, I think we've heard a couple of things that are really clear. So one is focus, right? Two is starting with the customer and thinking about how you fit into their world and what's changing and what you can take advantage of. And then three is finding, if you are really trying to disrupt and do something new, finding the receptive audience so that you don't stumble right out of the gate. You have like what you believe is a really core, impactful idea, but if you can find somebody who's receptive, like a core audience that's receptive, then you are going to be much more likely. So how do you identify receptive audiences? Like how did you identify that Manila, the Philippines, were a place that was really receptive and ready for this?
So what we did is we did a bunch of analysis where we took various factors where we could get data. Some of the key stats that we used were looking at the recipient side of the equation. So we use the recipient side of the equation as a proxy for the willingness and the technological savvy of the sender. The Philippines, at the time that we launched, was the highest per capita text message rate in the world. So the customers, even the grandmas, are using text messaging back and forth, even with their dumb phones. They were still like messaging like crazy. You saw Facebook utilization was one of the highest in the world. You saw internet access availability was relatively high, and you also saw that the average income of the person, this flips to the send side, the average income of the American immigrant, or the immigrant in America, was above average. So they were like 56,000, I think, at the time we launched 5 years ago. And so you ended up with this demographic that was likely connected. They likely had a smartphone on the send side, and they were sending into an audience that was going to value the digital innovation that we could power with mobile. And if you look at what's happened over the last 5 years, we were correct in saying that was probably the right market to start in, but all the other markets have caught up. Like if you look at where we're at in India, if you look at where we're at in Mexico and Latin America, it's insane to see how much the customers are valuing the innovation that we can provide with mobile status and mobile messaging now.
So you were able to take some publicly available information about the market and your hypothesis, and then prioritize based upon access and perceived adoption levels, right? To identify. Is there an example of places that you did some analysis around for what's next, or where you thought you could be disruptive that you ran into a wall? You're like, no, our assumptions were wrong? Because that's awesome, right? Like upfront, being able to de-risk the idea as a company and then have it work beautifully is amazing. It's a great feeling. So great job, right? But where'd you hit a wall? What assumptions do you make where you're like, nope, this isn't working. The activity isn't going to go the way we thought.
The most obvious one is that we thought mobile wallets were the future. And so our initial product that we launched was called a Gcash mobile wallet, was the product we integrated with. And so we thought we were going to send into these mobile wallets because you see in certain geographies that mobile money is taken off. The customers didn't really want that. and that was actually one of the trends that we thought, one of the characteristics that we were looking for when we were choosing our initial market was a market that had some form of mobile adoption on money. What we learned was that what actually mattered the most for our business was the bank adoption rates, or what, because we learned that we needed to be agnostic of the type of funding vehicle we were going into. In the Philippines, the banking industry is growing 15% year over year. Like, customers are becoming banked more and more, and that was the more important trend than the mobile wallet trend. Right now, if you look at our trailing 12 months, we still support the mobile wallet, which is our first integration. Well less than 1% of our transactions go to it, and so that was a failed assumption that we quickly realized right when we launched by talking to customers was the wrong assumption, and then we integrated with a broader set of partners right after that.
Got it. And that key point I want to underscore, you quickly realized by talking to customers that was not going to work, right? And so that's awesome. Like, in the context of a startup, being able to be close to your customers is one of the massive advantages. You start with a smaller base, you're able to learn from them really quickly. Now, you're both working in much more complex, larger organizations, but you're both dealing in a way where it's more direct to consumer than a lot of the organization has been before. And I tend to think, right, the worldview I have is that one of the brand new things about mobile is that everybody has this voice in their pocket, right? And the consumer can speak back, and they in fact expect to, right? Half of the room right now is texting somebody. And so we're just like super chatty on these devices. So how are you taking that kind of advantage, that direct to consumer and that listening function, back into BMW? Is that a component of the strategy yet? Is that what you're seeing as evidence of we got to keep going down this path?
It definitely is. I think at the same time we're catching up with the amount of feedback that we're getting. We didn't necessarily launch with a very digital way to capture and analyze that feedback, and so we're sort of now creating that on the back end. And part of it is that BMW had never launched a product like this before. And so they didn't really necessarily expect that we would get this much feedback. Another thing that's been kind of interesting for me is seeing, for BMW, obviously with a new tech app, you have issues all the time, things that are completely out of your control. Your carrier network goes down, and people can't unlock and lock their cars. Things that there's a variety of things that cause.
That's not hypothetical, is it?
That's totally hypothetical. We're not on the T-Mobile network, so no worries. But there's things that happen, and when we initially launched, BMW had this very interesting sort of reaction to, we can't ever go out on the social airwaves and admit that anything went wrong, or that we made a mistake, or that there's an issue, because that's just not historically how they've done things. That's, they never really had a reason to necessarily. And so we kind of had to convince them and teach them about this transparency that is really important with a mobile app, because we're getting feedback from people all the time. And therefore we have to equally be providing feedback and updates and responses to folks. So that's been really interesting in talking about that, the disruption of this large old 100-year-old car company, and disrupting the way that they think about communicating with their customers has been really interesting.
And when you're trying to educate them, are you finding it more effective to educate them around risk mitigation and management, or is it about the opportunity to do something new and have new relationships? Like, which one resonates better?
I think it's the opportunity to do something new and have new relationships, or maybe that's just my bias, because that's the way that I want us to go. But, in terms of, I think, Lisa, what you're talking about with your new sort of customer service approach, I think is really, really interesting, because, we are using sort of a more traditional customer service approach that I don't think always fits the need. Our ability to respond to emails and to social media is not as agile and seamless and personal as I would prefer that it be. And I think we have a lot of room to grow there. And some of it is just going to be sort of convincing BMW that that's what we need to do for the customer, and to be a premium product, we're always looking for what sets us apart from our competitors, and providing a premium level of customer service is to match the product itself should be part of that. So we're definitely we just launched in April, so we're figuring out what it means to do that.
And so, Lisa, I know that you have had some of these same challenges. You're sort of several years ahead in terms of trying to figure out, is the case risk mitigation, is the case opportunity, and then actually going down the path, you have to start delivering on the promise, right? So what's that been like at T-Mobile? Like, how'd you sell it, and then how'd you deliver on that promise? Including, we're fortunate to work together. A bunch of startups in the room are actually out there thinking about how do we help companies. How did you pursue disruption with partners to help you actually execute?
So just before I go to that point, I just wanted to follow up on one of Holly's points about the listening component. Because I think for big companies, this is a huge challenge because there's so many platforms that we go to listen to our customers, right? I mean, there's so many technologies to the startups, right? There's this disparate availability of technologies, whether it be, you're listening on the web, you're listening on your social channels, you're listening in the stores, in care, right? And your customers are giving you all of this valuable information that different parts of the company you're listening to, and we're not all aggregating it. And which things do you take advantage of, and which things do you discount because it's just someone complaining on Twitter, right? And I think that for us is actually one of our biggest challenges from a listening perspective, is just who do you listen to, and what channels are actually valuable. And whose voice is the loudest? Does the vocal minority become the customer response that you listen to? And for us, actually listening to our frontline, which is how we refer to our retail and our care folks, actually has been one of the most valuable learnings, right? Because we can listen to customers directly, but they engage at a higher rate with those folks, those humans in the field, more than anyone else, right? And they know our customers better than anyone else. So if you can listen to those folks who are actually engaging them on a daily basis, that's extremely important. So I just want to make that point from a technology perspective. From a partnership perspective, it's something that we're really excited about. We don't think we can do this all by ourselves. Obviously we engage with folks like Apptentive, but I think from a disruption perspective and sort of viewing what's next, right? As a company, we're looking for those opportunities. I mean, you see, we just announced the Sync Up product last week, which is basically a product where you can get T-Mobile Wi-Fi in your car, and that's a partnership product. The Twilio Open API partnership was recently announced, I guess, a few months ago. So we're looking for, like, how do we evolve our business and our industry, not by ourselves, but we recognize that we are a wireless provider, right? So we either have to rethink how our business is presented to customers, or rethink how we can partner to make it available in different ways.
And let's get a little bit into the advice for people here, right? Because we have so many startuppers in the room working on different ideas, and potentially some of them are thinking about helping companies like yours, right, be successful. Like, what's advice, if you are approaching a company like a T-Mo, approaching a company like a ReachNow, approaching a company like Remitly, and saying, hey, we think we can help you accelerate some of the things you are doing, your mission. We think, in particular, we've heard you say you're disrupting this area, and we can really help you out. What's a good way and what's a bad way? Because I'm sure you've seen both.
So I think for me, one of the challenges that we have is just how do we partner with someone at scale? So I think our challenge in working with a lot of startups is they get frustrated with our bureaucracy, right? Our procurement departments, our legal departments, and you on the one hand, that's just the sort of the necessary part of playing the game. On the other hand, it's just the reality of how our enterprise operates. But your product also has to work at scale, right? I think one of the challenges when we did messaging was we were looking at a lot of different products and different partners to go and launch that with us. And in order to do that vendor partnership effectively, we needed someone who realized that we weren't talking about, a pilot in one center. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of engagements, right? And that's a very different conversation to be had, right? Yeah. So if you're pitching to an enterprise, one is just patience, right? I wouldn't recommend it necessarily as your first go around, right? Find someone medium sized to start your conversation, because we can be really difficult, right? And so that's not to say that we don't want those relationships, and we do value those relationships, but I think just in terms of doing it well, I think you just have to realize that it's going to be a long haul.
And for a company like our size, where we have about 100 employees here in Seattle, you don't end up having as much layering in the bureaucracy and the legal, although as we grow it starts to become a little bit more friction there than there used to be. But you don't generally have as much friction there. But what you do end up having friction with is you're going more direct to the people that are actually doing the work. And so you end up having to make a case of ROI that's a little bit more granular than just the problem that an executive or a manager might say, hey, this is a problem that I have and I'm not getting a solution from my team, and your solution maps to that problem. Therefore, I think we should pay money to try to solve this problem. In our case, it's a little bit more granular than that, because we also likely see the same problem. We can identify. There's companies that will pitch me solutions to problems that I have all the time. The biggest problem that I face is the trade-off between the work to integrate with a third-party solution versus the work to actually get the business value that we need in the short term. So my biggest piece of advice would be make it just so simple for trial. Make it so simple to demonstrate value, such that you don't have to get a sales engineer and you don't have to get all of the process relating. Because as soon as you start having this process of integration to demonstrate value, we're just going to say it's just not a good ROI, because the problems that we have that are the big problems, we're putting resources of our own on, and the problems that we have that are small but that are nuanced, that are kind of just nits to us, that might be real problems that we would love to have solutions for. We just can't distract ourselves and distract our resources around long integrations and long demonstrations of value. And if I think about the products that we've used the most in our company that are third-party products from startups, they're the ones that was just like a 5-minute integration. We could get value from it, and all of a sudden we're like, wow, this is useful, and let's use it more. And because that makes it so much easier to then we pay them thousands of dollars a month now because it was so easy.
I would definitely echo everything that you've just said. I'm not sure I have the greatest answer to the question, because honestly, I'm still trying to figure out how to get things done in my own company. So, but I to echo what you said, I think it's very true that things happen. We are part of sort of obviously a very large company. There's a lot of bureaucracy there, and there are a lot of things that we know we need and that we want to do and that we are looking towards doing. And I think right now it's sort of, we're at a point where we're sort of gathering information and gathering ideas and gathering ways that we can solve problems that we have. The timeline by which we'll actually be able to tackle those problems is sort of a different thing. So, I guess my advice would be, at this point, we're a very small team. We have about 35 people here in Seattle. We're growing incredibly quickly, but we all are going, 100 miles a minute, but we're always interested in at least knowing about what's out there, even if we table it for a second and say, hey, come back to us in second quarter of next year, give us a proposal. This is something we definitely like to do, but right now we're on this fast moving train that just can't stop to integrate something right now. So, but knowing what's out there and available to us when we don't have time to seek it out ourselves, I think is really valuable.
I think just one point to sort of bring back what the point that Josh had made earlier is just about trust, right? I think if you're working with external partners, right, simplicity is key, but then the same way that we think about our customers is the way that we think about our partners, right? You have to deliver, right? And whether that's the product working or the engineering team being available when something does go wrong, because inevitably it will, no matter what the product is, or just that customer service component of sales is extremely valuable, right? Knowing that I can call somebody and that they'll do something about the issue. So if you've got one of those companies and you're working with large companies that need that help, I think the customer service component there is extremely valuable.
Okay, so I just got the sign. We've got about 5 minutes left, and one of the things we talked about prepping for this that I thought was really interesting is we were talking about mobile as enabling a new way to connect with customers, and we were going down the stack of like acquisition, activation, retention, loyalty. Where is it really most important? And I think all three of you really honed in on retention and loyalty aspect. We've got this new connectivity. So I'm hoping that you could leave us with a few thoughts on what you're learning that's changed around retention and loyalty and the activities you can engage in, but maybe even deeper, the insight into the consumer and their expectation. And so I'll start with you, Josh, right? Because you said something really interesting to us about acquisition, which is you don't really create demand in the remittance industry, but then it's really the activation, the retention, the loyalty. So what are you learning in mobile around this?
What we find that's really interesting is that the customers stay with us because it's so much easier and it's such a better customer experience than they've had with other ways that they have done their money transmission. To the point that Robbie made, we have a lot of. We don't put a lot of energy into marketing to our existing customer base. We put our energy into our product for our existing customer base, because if we can create a great customer experience for customers, especially when things go wrong, I have to emphasize that, because things will go wrong, and especially when things go wrong, if you can create a good customer experience, then you'll actually increase your loyalty. And in our case, what we consider is our share of wallet, because customers, we're trying to get the maximum share of wallet for customers that are sending money overseas, because they have other options. They can use other options, and it's more than price. The biggest thing is trust. And so how do you create trust with customers? It's when we do screw up, we have a customer support agent that's able to explain to them very clearly what happened, where their money is, and what they can expect, and give them options as it relates to what we can do on their behalf. And so one of the things that we've done since the very beginning is we've kept our customer support tied directly with product. So as I initially was managing product and customer support, and I still manage customer support, and I partner really closely with the product team, because it's every customer interaction from our point of view is a defect at some level, and we're never going to remove all defects because some defects are too costly for us to actually productize. But we need to treat that as that we failed the customer in that sense, and so let's create a really great customer experience for them with human interaction that bridges that gap so that they can look at us as a holistic product that actually solves their problems.
And I would definitely build on that. I think, one thing that we've realized with when we have issues, when we have an outage or something, our customers are really savvy. They are not happy with just, sorry, something happened, system went down for an hour, we got it back up. They want to know why, and I think treating the customers like the savvy users that they are, and almost always treating them like they're testers. Like, this is a really new product, it's a disruptive product. We're learning, they're learning, we're all learning together, and treating it that way, and really providing them information on what we're doing to constantly improve our product, and sort of taking them on that journey with us so that they feel like they're actually part of the product development, and making sure that when we change things, we let them know, like, we heard this from you. We're responding to you and your request for new features and your request for way things could work better. And so I think that's a huge part of it. We're in an interesting industry where, it's all about reliability and convenience, which, is true with a lot of industries, but with car sharing, it's all about whatever car is closest to you. I have to know that when I open my app, I'm going to be able to find a car, at least 80% of the time within walking distance, or I'm going to give up at some point. And so we have to really focus on being that reliable, dependable service for somebody, or we can lose them really quick and they may not come back and try it again. There's somebody else out there providing a similar service that they're going to go to.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing for us is at the aggregate level, we are about acquisition, right? The journey over the last 4 years has been about how do we become a major wireless carrier, right? And now it's starting to shift of, okay, now we've established ourselves as a sort of major player in this realm, and we're sort of the third largest carrier in the U.S. How do we pivot all of our focus on customer experience over to sort of what a customer would see in digital, what the customer would experience in customer care, and that sort of has changed how we're thinking about things. Because it's super easy to switch right now, right? I mean, other than the pain of porting your number or backing up your phone, it's not that hard these days to switch from one to another because there's no contracts, which is our fault. But it's
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So when we think about retention and having to do with customer experience, right? I think normally the reason a customer would leave a carrier is because of the network, right? But if we can get the network out of the way, then the next hurdle is customer service. And I think historically we've been the number one carrier for customer service. That's great, but in terms of moving forward and what's next, no one wants to call us, right? No one wants to call their wireless carrier. But we've forced them to do it. We've created the best customer service and we've created this behavior. So as we look to retention going forward and people change their modality of, I'm not going to call you, I'm not going to call my friend, I'm going to text you. It's us getting ahead of that and getting ahead of that next pain point of no one really wants to get on the phone to solve their problem. So how do we use that as a way to retain our customers going forward instead of actually making them call?
Awesome. Well, I want to thank Lisa and Josh and Holly for joining us here at Seattle Startup Week and talking a little bit about mobile and disruption and fundamentally about the customer and how to make them happier. I want to remind you, all three of these companies, ours as well, so all four of us headquartered in and around Seattle. I know all four of us have open headcount, so if you're looking to join companies that are being disruptive in their own ways, be sure to check us out and continue to enjoy the rest of Seattle Startup Week. Thank you.